Today is the revisit class of the endocrinology, the introduction of the endocrinology and different glands, hormones. So, your voice is hello. So the endocrine gland and the hormones overview. As we know that hormones are the substances or the which are released from the endocrine gland, and they are directly poured into the bloodstream, and then they get reached to the target cell, and then they make their action or they execute the action. So there are many endocrine glands in the body which releases their specific hormones, and these hormones are act upon the target cell and they execute their action. So there are this picture is showing the number of organs which are releasing their hormone. Now the introduction. The endocrine system the organs of the body and secrete hormones directly into the body fluid, such as blood. That regulates the chemical reaction in the cell and therefore control the functions of the organ, tissues, and the other cell. Here you can see in this picture, the gland is releasing the hormone, and then it get enter into the bloodstream and act upon the target tissue. Endocrine glands are actually the ductless gland, and they release the hormone directly into the target tissue, into the bloodstream. Now the classification of the hormone. Hello. Your voice is coming. Hello. This classification is showing the classes of the hormones like steroid hormones and the peptide hormone, amino acid hormone, and the miscellaneous hormones. And in case of the steroid hormones are adrenal cortical hormones and the sex hormones. The other hormones the peptide hormones like insulin and the glucagon. And number second, the amino acid derivative hormone, the tyrosine derivative hormone, the thyroid hormone, and the miscellaneous hormones which are released. These hormones are called from Now the sex hormones again divided into two, male and the female sex hormones. The female sex hormones are the estrogen and progesterone, and the male sex hormones are the androgen like testosterone. So the hormone is defined as the chemical messenger synthesized by the endocrine gland and transported by the blood to the target organ or the tissue, the site of action. The endocrine glands are hypothalamus, pituitary gland, which has the two portions, the anterior lobe and the posterior lobe. That secretes different hormones. The thyroid gland, the parathyroid gland, adrenal glands. Again, the adrenal gland has the two portions, the cortex and the medulla, and these portions of the adrenal glands are secreting the different hormones.
अरे नहीं चल रहा भाई, अरे नहीं चल रहा यार जाके। आप तो फिर आपको सबसे पहले चलता।
Hello.
और हमारे
So I was telling you about the endocrine glands. The adrenal glands has the two portion, cortex and the medulla, and the cortex is secreting the different hormone and the medulla is secreting the different hormones. Now the islets of Langerhans of the pancreas are secreting multiple hormones like insulin and the glucagon and the pancreatic polypeptide and somatostatin. The gonads like ovaries and the testes are secreting their hormone. The pineal gland, thymus gland, and the other tissues of the body or other organs of the body are secreting the different hormones. Now the hypothalamus, as you know that the hypothalamus regulates the autonomic nervous system, emotions, feeding, satiety, thirst, body temperature. The hormones are related to these functions are the releasing hormone, the external transport to the posterior lobe. Now there are the hypothalamus is secreting the releasing factors, and these releasing factors are carried by the bloodstream or by the external transport to the targeted gland, and then they act upon that gland, and then that gland is secreting that gland secretes the hormones. The hypothalamic releasing hormones regulate the anterior pituitary like growth hormone releasing hormone, the growth hormone inhibitory hormone, thyrotropin releasing hormone, corticotropin releasing hormone, gonadotropin releasing hormone, and the prolactin inhibitory hormone. The pituitary has the two lobes. The anterior lobe are secreting 6 hormones: the growth hormone, prolactin, melanocyte stimulating hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone, adrenocorticotropic hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, and the luteinizing hormone. These all hormones are very important, and they has their action on the targeted tissue, which execute the functions in the body. Like the growth hormone promotes the mitosis, cell division, elongation of the long bone, healing of the wound, and lack of the human growth hormone causes retarded growth. Posterior pituitary or the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland, which is also called as neurohypophysis, the site of release of the hormones synthesized in the hypothalamus. Actually, these hormones are secrete from the hypothalamus, and then they get stored in the posterior pituitary lobe or the posterior pituitary gland. These hormones are oxytocin and antidiuretic hormones. The oxytocin actually stimulates the smooth muscle contraction of the uterus and the mammary gland. The myoepithelial cell of the mammary gland they get contract due to the action of the oxytocin, and then it causes ejection of the milk. While the antidiuretic hormone stimulate the water reabsorption in the collecting duct and stimulate the vasoconstriction. That's why it is also called as vasopressin. As we know that it preserves the water. So if the lack of the antidiuretic hormone occurs, it leads to diabetes insipidus. The thyroid gland, it is located in the neck, and it releases three hormones the thyroxine, which is also called as T4, and tridothyronine, which is also called as T3. It is actually the active hormone, and the calcitonin. So the follicular cell secretes the thyroxine and the tridothyronine, while the parafollicular cell secretes the calcitonin, the calcium preserving hormones. The thyroid gland composed of the follicle cell produce thyroglobulin, which contain the thyroxine and the tridothyronine, and the parafollicular cell secretes the calcitonin. Parathyroid gland, four in number, and they are embedded on the posterior surface of the thyroid gland. They secretes the parathyroid hormone. It stimulates the osteoclast to free the calcium from the bones. So whenever there is a decrease in the concentration of the calcium in the blood, it get released from the parathyroid gland, and then it act upon the bones, where it increases the osteoclastic activity, and this due to this osteoclastic activity, the calcium is released from the bone, and it maintains the level of the calcium in the blood, and also it causes or stimulates the calcium uptake from the intestine. Very important hormone, the parathyroid hormone, because in the presence of um, parathyroid hormone, 125 dihydroxy cholecalciferol is formed in the and then it causes this 125 dihydroxy cholecalciferol, which is the active form of the vitamin D, which is also called as calcitriol. And in the presence of the calcitriol, the calcium is absorbed from the intestine, and then it enters into the bloodstream. So a very specific protein which is present in the enterocyte, which is called calbandin protein, and this calbandin protein binds the calcium, and then the calcium is reabsorbed into the reabsorbed from the intestine. Adrenal glands, pair of adrenal gland are present at the top of the superior pole of each kidney. If we take a section of this, take the section of this gland, so we will see the outer portion, which is called cortex of the adrenal gland, and the inner portion or the central portion, which is called the medulla of the adrenal gland. So if we see histologically, we will see there are three layers of the cortex which secretes the mineralocorticoid, glucocorticoid, and androgen, while the medulla is secreting epinephrine, norepinephrine, and one other hormone, which is the vasodilator, which has the vasodilatation or vasodilator action, which is called adrenomedulline. The adrenal glands now the pancreas, the islet cell, about 1 million embedded in the pancreas. It controls the control center for the blood glucose, the insulin from the beta cell, and the glucagon from the alpha cell. So there are three type of cells are present: alpha, beta, and delta cell. So these cell are secreting, alpha cell is secreting glucagon, beta cell is secreting insulin, and the B cells are secreting somatostatin, and also a fourth hormone identified, which is called pancreatic polypeptide hormone. The islets of Langerhans, the insulin stimulates the glucose uptake and it causes the glycogenesis. The glucagon stimulates the glycogenolysis and glucose release from the liver. When we take the food, so the insulin is secreted because of the high blood sugar level, and this insulin increases the entry of the glucose inside the cell, and then all this glucose uh, all this glucose get stored in the form of glycogen in the liver as well as in the skeletal muscle. While uh, in between the two meals, if there is any decrease in the glucose level in the blood, so the glucagon is released and it causes glycogenolysis and it releases the sustained release of the glucose into the bloodstream and it maintains the blood sugar level. So the glucagon is also a very important hormone. Gonads, the ovaries are secreting estrogen and progesterone, while the testes are secreting the testosterone, which is a powerful androgen. Pineal gland, suspended in the third ventricle from the diencephalon, it secreted melatonin, it inhibits the early puberty, and it maintains the day-night cycle. So timing of the sleep, body temperature, and appetite. This is the pineal gland. Here you can see this blue on the posterior aspect of the brain stem. The thymus gland secretes thymoproteins, the thymic factor, and the thymosin. It influences the development of the T lymphocytes. In in the childhood, this thymus gland is active in the infancy and the childhood, but as the age increases, the thymus gland are get rudimentary, and these two hormones are decreased. Uh, uh, these two hormones are the level of these two hormones are is down because of the regression of the size of the thymus gland. The other organs which are secreting the hormones like stomach, the small intestine, and also the heart is secreting the ANP, anti-natriuretic peptide, a very important hormone which is released from the heart. The kidneys are secreting the erythropoietin, adipose tissue secreting the leptin, and the skin is formed the cholecalciferol, and the placenta is secreting multiple hormone uh, like progesterone, human chorionic gonadotropin, and uh, now the endocrine system, the general principle of the endocrine system. The function of the endocrine system are control the processes involved in the movement and physiological equilibrium, and it includes all the tissues and the glands that secrete hormone into the blood, and secretion of the most hormone is regulated by negative feedback system. The number of receptors for a specific hormone can be altered to meet the body's demand. Actually, the hormone is released from the endocrine gland, it gets entered into the bloodstream, and then it reaches uh, up to the target tissue where the binding receptors are present, over the target cell. So these hormones are get bind with it. According to the type of the hormone, the receptors are present inside either inside the cell and over the cell membrane or inside the nucleus. Like the peptide hormone or the protein originated hormones has the receptors over the cell membrane, while the steroid hormone has the receptor in the cytoplasm, while the tyrosine derivative hormone has the receptor inside the nucleus. Hormone action: the steroid hormone pass through the cell membrane, bind to the specific receptor because the receptor is present in the cytoplasm, and then it enters the hormone receptor complex, enters the nucleus to bind with the cell DNA, which then activate the certain genes, the direct genes activation. The messenger RNA is synthesized in the nucleus and enters the cytoplasm and promote the protein synthesis for enzyme as a catalyst, tissue growth and the repair, and also regulate the enzyme function. So these steroid hormones are very important, especially for the protein synthesis. Now here you can see the mechanism of action of the hormone. Steroid hormone, yes, the receptor is present inside this. Now you can see again. Yes, this receptor, the hormone bind with it, enters into the nucleus where the messenger RNA is formed, and this messenger RNA act upon the ribosome and the new protein is formed. The non-steroidal hormones react with the specific receptors which are present outside the cell or in the cell membrane. This triggers an enzyme reaction which leads to the formation of second messenger, which is one of the second messenger is cyclic AMP. The cyclic AMP can produce a specific intracellular function, like it activates the cell enzyme, change in the membrane permeability, promotes the protein synthesis, change in the cell metabolism, and also stimulation of the cell secretions. Now here you can see the green color hormone bind with the receptors located over the cell membrane, and then it activates the cyclic AMP, and then the cyclic AMP executes the function of the target cell. Now the regulation of the hormone, it is most of the hormones are regulated by the negative feedback mechanism. As you know that the negative feedback mechanism is the primary mechanism through which the endocrine system maintains the homeostasis. Secretion of a specific hormone turned on and off by specific physiological changes, like the examples are the plasma glucose level and the insulin response and the thyroid hormone feedback control. So what happens when the secretion of the hormone is decreased, or so when we take meal, in case of insulin, insulin is not secreted normally from the beta cell, but when we take the meal, it increases the blood glucose level, so the insulin is secreted from the pancreas and get enter into the bloodstream, and it executes its action over the cell. But as the blood, and after that action of the insulin, the blood glucose return to the normal within 1 to 1.5 hours. Now, at this time, the certain the level of the insulin reaches up to the certain level, and then it causes negative feedback mechanism. So it inhibits the secretion of the insulin. Now here you can see the negative feedback mechanism of the protein hormones of the anterior pituitary. Here you can see the hypothalamus is releasing the activating factors, and which acts upon the anterior pituitary, which is blue in color, and this increases the secretion of the pituitary hormone. In this animation, the example is given is thyroid stimulating hormone. So the thyrotropic releasing hormone is released from the hypothalamus, act upon the anterior pituitary, and this anterior pituitary gland secretes the thyroid stimulating hormone. It enters into the bloodstream and it reaches the thyroid gland, from where it increases the secretion of T3 and T4, and a certain level is achieved. So this sends the negative feedback signals to the hypothalamus, and it inhibits the secretion of the releasing factor. Now the receptors are actually the protein molecule that receives and responds to the neurotransmitter or other substances, responds to the neurotransmitters, the hormones, and the other substances. The receptors of the for the hormones are, when the hormone is, this picture is showing the endocrine cell which secretes the hormone. It directly enters into the bloodstream, and then it reaches to the target cell where the receptors of this specific hormone are present, and these receptors binds the hormone, and then it causes execution of the action of the target tissue. The type of receptors: the cell surface receptors are receptors on the outer surface of the cell membrane that take part in the communication between the cell and the outside world. Now, the nuclear receptors are receptors found within the cell that is responsible for sensing the steroid and the thyroid hormone and certain other molecules. The immune receptors are receptors that occurs on the surface of the immunocyte and bind to the antigen. So there are many types of receptors are present over the cell surface of the specific receptor for the specific hormone or the neurotransmitter substances. The number of receptors over the target tissue are normally not in constant and not remain constant because of the, if the hormone secretion is sufficient, so this hormone reaches the targeted tissue or the target cell where the receptors are present. These receptors bind the hormone, and then the hormone receptors complex enter inside the cell where it executes its function, and the number of receptors are get reduced. So the down regulation is the decrease of hormone receptors, which decreases the sensitivity of that hormone. So more and more number of the receptors are get utilized by the hormone. So the number of the receptors are get decreased in that targeted tissue or the targeted cell. And the upregulation is the increase in the number of the receptors, which causes cell to be more sensitive to a particular hormone. In case of decrease in the secretion of the hormone, so the number of receptors over the targeted cell cell get increased, and whenever the hormone is released from that specific endocrine gland. This hormone reaches that target cell. The number of because of the large number of receptors are present over the cell. That's why it causes increased sensitivity to that particular hormone. Here you can see this is the upregulation, which the number of receptors are increased in number, and whenever the here you can see also the neurotransmitter substance which is present increase in concentration, but as this hormone binds with the receptors, so the hormone is also get reduced in the level, and also the number of receptors are get reduced. So the upregulation is present whenever there is a decreased secretion of the hormone. So during upregulation, the neural receptors increase in number, which in turn increases the chemical dependency. And during the downregulation, the neural receptors decrease in number, which in turn decreases the chemical dependency. This example of the nervous tissue, but there are specific receptors for the specific hormone are present over the specific organ. Now, as you know that the hormone are get released inside the cell, get released from the endocrine gland, and the level of the hormone in the bloodstream is high at the initial phase, but as the hormone is act or bind with the receptors, the level of the hormone inside the bloodstream on the body fluid is get decreased. So the hormone is get cleared from the body by certain ways, like the metabolic destruction by the tissue, number one, and number two, the binding with the tissue. So if the hormone is get bind with the tissue or the target cell, so the concentration of that hormone in the bloodstream, in the body fluid, is decreased. Excretion by the liver into the bile, it is again a very important. So the hormone, especially the steroid hormone, are get bind with the bile, and then they get excreted by the liver. And number four is the excretion by the kidney into the urine. So the water soluble hormone, which are mostly released by the or excreted by the kidneys. So the clearance is very important. In case of thyroid hormone, as we know that the 99% of the thyroxine is get bind with the plasma protein. So if the binding, if the hormone is bound with the plasma protein, or it not get released from the that binding, or get released from the what do you call the binding plasma protein, so this hormone does not execute its function, or it does not bind with the targeted tissue, because normally the hormones are which is present in the bloodstream, it get released or move out of the bloodstream through the pulmonary through the capillaries and get enter into the body fluid, but the bound hormone is not released or filtered or cross the capillary fenestra because it get bind with the protein. अब आप इसको ऐसा समझ लो कि जैसे कि हार्मोन अगर बाइंड हुआ है बाइंडिंग प्रोटीन के साथ या प्लाज्मा प्रोटीन के साथ, तो वो कैपिलरी से बाहर नहीं आ सकेगा. अब जब कैपिलरी से बाहर नहीं आ, बिकॉज उसका साइज बड़ा हो जाता है बाइंडिंग प्रोटीन के साथ मिलकर, तो वो उस फेनेस्ट्रेशन जो होती है इन बिटवीन द एंडोथेलियल सेल ऑफ द कैपिलरीज, वहां से बाहर नहीं आ सकता. लेकिन जैसे ही वो रिलीज होता है तो साइज, चूंकि हार्मोन जो है वो कैन क्रॉस द फेनेस्ट्रेशन, so the free hormone is get entered into the body fluid. Now after this binding with the receptors, the hormone receptor complex is get entered into the cell, where it stimulate the second messenger system, where it get stimulate the second messenger system. Like if we say the protein hormone, it has this protein hormone is get bind with the surface receptors, which is also called as G protein receptors. The G protein receptors binds the protein hormone, and then it get entered into the cell where the hormone is released. But sometimes this hormone is get destroyed by the lysosomal action of the lysozyme. But most of the hormone is causes the stimulation of the second messenger system, cyclic AMP. So in case of protein hormone, we can say the hormone stimulate the cyclic AMP, and this cyclic AMP again stimulate the adenyl cyclase enzyme, and then it causes the cell response. So the second messenger is actually a molecule that relays the messages in a cell from receptors on a cell membrane to the final destination, where an action within the cell is to take place. The second messengers, there are certain second messengers which are present in our body. The cyclic AMP, the cyclic GMP, inositol triphosphate, diacyl glycerol, and calcium. So there are many second messenger systems are present in different tissue or the different organs, where they respond to the specific hormone. This example or this picture is showing the G protein action, where you can see the hormone which is green in color and the receptor is purple in color, and then the hormone is get bind with this receptor. G protein is get activated. Actually, the G protein is the trimeric compound. It has alpha, beta, and gamma component, and the alpha component is larger than the other one, the other two. So the hormone binds with the alpha subunit, and the beta gamma dimers again reaches for the recycling. But the alpha subunit and the hormone get enter inside the cell, and it execute or stimulate the second messenger, and then it leads to cell response. Okay, thank you very much.
Hello.
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 Yes, lecture is finished now.
ठीक है, एंड कर दूं सर?
हाँ, एंड कर दें.